The sound of the Pacific Ocean on the morning of April 18, 1942, was not a roar. It was a physical assault. It was the crushing, rhythmic slam of 30-foot swells smashing against the steel hull of the USS Hornet. A noise that vibrated through the soles of Captain Thomas "Tom" Rylance's boots and settled deep in the marrow of his bones. Tom, a 27-year-old pilot from the foggy coast of Oregon, sat in the cramped, freezing cockpit of a B-25 Mitchell bomber lashed to the flight deck. His normal had become a world of gray steel, wet canvas, and the suffocating smell of high-octane aviation fuel mixed with the salt spray that coated everything in a sticky, corrosive film. Tom's world was defined by the vibration of the engines he wasn't allowed to start yet. He sat with his hands resting lightly on the yoke, his leather gloves worn smooth at the knuckles. Beside him, his co-pilot, Lieutenant Red Miller, was asleep, his head lolling against the plexiglass, a half-finished letter to his wife tucked into his flight suit. This was the fragile equilibrium they had maintained for 2 weeks of absolute secrecy, a suspended animation between the safety of the carrier and the impossibility of the mission. They were ghosts in the machine, Army pilots on a Navy ship, heading toward a destination they weren't allowed to name, carrying a payload that felt too heavy for the laws of physics. The B-25, nicknamed the Iron Dice, was stripped of everything that made it comfortable. The radio was gone. The bottom turret was gone. The Norden bomb sight, a piece of technology worth more than Tom's life, had been removed to prevent it falling into enemy hands, replaced by a 20-cent piece of aluminum, known as the Mark Twain. They were flying a holodout, shell filled with extra fuel tanks and 500-pound incendiaries. Tom looked out through the rain-streaked windshield. The flight deck was a chaotic ballet of deckhands in color-coded jerseys leaning into the gale, fighting to keep the 16 bombers secure. The ship pitched violently, the bow dipping so low that green water washed over the flight deck, spraying the landing gear of the lead plane. It was a terrifying sight. Medium bombers designed for long concrete runways, perched precariously on a heaving wet postage stamp in the middle of an angry ocean. Tom checked his watch. 7:30. The plan was precise. Steam for another 10 hours. Close the distance to 400 miles off the Japanese coast. Launch at dusk, bomb Tokyo by night, and recover in China by dawn. It was a suicide packed with mathematics, relying on every single drop of fuel. "Wake up, Red," Tom murmured, nudging his co-pilot. "The coffee's getting cold." Red grunted, blinking awake. "Are we there yet, Dad?" "No. Still in the middle of nowhere. Still vibrating." "Good. I dreamed the props fell off." It was a standard exchange, a ritual to ward off the fear. They were normal. Just 2 guys sitting in a metal tube, waiting for the war to start. Then came the disturbance. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a siren, not at first. It was a voice on the ship's intercom, the bullhorn that cut through the wind with a strange, frantic urgency. "General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations. Surface contact. Surface contact." Tom sat up straighter. Surface contact. They were supposed to be ghosts. The entire task force of Hornets, the Enterprise, the cruisers, was operating under strict radio silence. He looked out the side window. Through the mist and the spray, he saw it. A small, insignificant speck bobbing in the violent swells about 2,000 yards off the port bow. It looked like a fishing trawler. "Red, look at that," Tom pointed. "Fishing boat," Red asked, squinting. "Picket boat," Tom corrected, his stomach tightening. "Japanese patrol. They've seen us." The cruiser USS Nashville, steaming alongside the Hornet, suddenly opened fire. The sound of the 6-inch guns was a flat, hard crack that slapped against the B-25's fuselage. Water geysers erupted around the tiny boat. It took minutes to sink it, minutes in which the radio operator on that boat was undoubtedly screaming a warning to Tokyo. Then came the precise, factual disturbance. The ship's loudspeakers crackled again. And this time, the voice belonged to Captain Mitcher, the skipper of the Hornet. The tone was not the calm, measured voice of a drill. It was the tight-clipped voice of a man changing history on the fly. Army pilots, man your planes. Army pilots, man your planes. Launch immediately. Repeat, launch immediately. Tom stared at the speaker. Immediately. He looked at his chart. He looked at the fuel gauges. He looked at red. Tom, red whispered, his face draining of color. Do the math. We're at ... What? 30 degrees north, 154 east. Yeah, that puts us 650 miles out. Maybe T-by. Yeah. The plan? The plan was 400 miles. We don't have the gas, Tom. We physically do not have the gas to reach the coast, bomb the target, and make the safe zone in China. If we launch now, we ditch in the East China Sea. This was the disturbance. An order rescinded to light the plan to launch at night. The plan that made survival possible was gone. It had been replaced by a tactical necessity. They had been spotted. The element of surprise was burning in the water with that picket boat. If they didn't launch now, the Japanese Navy would swarm the task force. The bombers had to go, not because they could make it, but because they had to clear the deck so the Hornet could fight or run. The machinery of survival had just shifted gears. The pilots and crews were no longer assets to be preserved. They were ballast to be jettisoned. Start the engines, Tom ordered, his voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Tom, we can't make it, Red argued, his hands shaking as he reached for the checklist. We're flying heavy. The wind? Look at the waves. The bow is pitching 30 feet. I said start the engines. Tom snapped, the anger masking the terror. We go. We go now. The sound of the Wright Cyclone engines coughing to life was a deafening metallic roar that shook the entire airframe. One by one, 16 bombers spun up their props, creating a chaotic storm of wind and noise on the deck. The smell of exhaust became choking. Tom watched the lead plane, Colonel Doolittle's aircraft. He watched the deck crew holding it back, timing the pitch of the ship. The carrier would dip its bow into the trough of a wave, then heave upward. Doolittle had to start his roll when the bow was down, so that by the time he reached the end of the deck, the ship would be rising, literally throwing the plane into the air if he mistimed it. He would slam into the face of a wave. Doolittle's plane lurched forward. It looked impossibly slow. The wind buffeted the wings. Tom held his breath. The B-25 staggered into the air, dipping dangerously low, spray kicking up from the wheels, before clawing for altitude. He made it, Red breathed. Our turn is coming, Tom said. Plane number 6. We're heavy, Red. We've got the extra incendiaries. They waited. The line moved forward. Plane 2 off. Plane 3 off. Plane 4 ... slipped. The deck was wet. The pilot corrected. He made it. Then it was Tom's turn. The deck officer in the yellow jersey stood in front of the nose, arm raised. He was watching the horizon, watching the gray wall of water rising ahead. The Hornet plunged into a trough, the deck tilting down like a playground slide. The officer dropped his arm. Tom slammed the throttles forward. Brakes release. Rolling. The iron dice surged. The vibration stopped being a sound and became a state of being. The plane rattled violently over the wooden planks. The tower of the carrier island flashed past on the right. The end of the deck rushed toward them. It looked too close. They weren't moving fast enough. The airspeed indicator was sluggish. Pull up, pull up. Red screamed. Tom felt the deck drop away beneath the wheels. but they weren't flying. They were falling. The ship had pitched down too soon. They had launched on the downstroke. The gray water filled the windshield. The crest of a wave, white and angry, loomed directly ahead. Tom hauled back on the yoke with every ounce of strength in his arms, his boots bracing against the rudder pedals. "Fly, you heavy bitch! Fly!" The engine screamed in protest. The belly of the bomber skimmed the top of the wave, sickening thump of water hitting the fuselage. Then lift. The wings caught the heavy, cold air. The B-25 shuddered and rose, banking lazily to the left to avoid the cruiser's superstructure. They were airborne. Tom leveled off at 50 feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He checked the compass. 270 degrees. West toward Tokyo. "We're up," Red said, his voice trembling. "We're actually up." "Check the fuel flow," Tom ordered, his eyes scanning the empty horizon. "Lean the mixture. We need every drop." They flew in silence for hours. The normal of the carrier deck was gone, replaced by the hypnotic drone of the engines and the vast, empty Pacific. The sun climbed higher, burning through the storm clouds. Tom did the math in his head, over and over. Speed, 160 knots. Distance, 600 miles to target. Fuel burn, 70 gallons an hour. It didn't add up. They would reach Tokyo at midday. They would bomb the factories in broad daylight, alerting every fighter defense in the city. And then they would fly toward China until the tanks ran dry. They would bail out in the dark, over unknown mountains. In the middle of a storm, the factual disturbance, the early launch, had turned dangerous. Mission into a one-way ticket. At 12:30, the coast of Japan appeared. It wasn't the dark, menacing fortress Tom had imagined. It looked peaceful. Green fields, small villages, fishing boats. It looked like Oregon. "Doors open," Tom said. "Target coming up." "The steel mill?" "Target coming up." "The steel mill?"